Hello, everybody, and thank you for joining me today to Backyard Birding from Your Balcony. Now, I do have backyard in quotes just because technically I don't have an actual backyard. I'm based in LA, so backyards can cost up anywhere up to $1 million, so I'm still working on saving for that. Anyways, everything is shot from my balcony. But some of the things that I talk about doesn't mean that it can't apply to you if you have your own backyard or thinking of creating your own bird studio. I know, like, there's this tree that I use I will talk about that's right next to my rail and where I use it as my bird studio, and some tips and tricks on how to add some little branches and perches to your backyard birding studio if you're thinking of creating one as well. So a little bit about myself. My name is Janet Vong, and I am a Tamron tech rep. And normally we would be traveling every week to do these in person, but unfortunately this year it doesn't look like we're doing that. But here are my social handles. I will have it at the end as well. And if there are any questions or tips and tricks, this is all new to me. So I started this new hobby pretty much right at the start of the shutdown, and it's been a great hobby. So it's very time consuming and addicting, and I'm glad I kind of got into it and talk about my journey. So here's a quick overview of what I'll be doing, talking about how and why I got into photographing birds, the lenses used, and equipment to consider, finding and waiting for birds. I'm going to talk about how I research and going from figuring out what birds are in my area and then figuring out what type of feeders to buy for certain types of birds. So I go into all that. And then using a tree, like I said, I have this tree that's right next to my balcony rail. And, funny story about that tree as well, and how I started using that as my bird studio, since I just moved to this area and I haven't furnished my balcony yet. I don't have like native plants or flowers to attract the birds yet. So I talk about how this tree has been attracting a lot of the birds for me. And then of course, looking at my bird images. Okay, so here's a story of how I got into photographing birds. It started out with me doing this hobby where in my last place where I lived in North Hollywood, California before that. So I wanted to do this hand feeding of the hummingbirds because I found out, I saw it from this one social media influencer, and I was like, oh my gosh, I thought it was the coolest thing, but there were no birds in the city. And now that I've moved to this area called Rancho Palos Verdes, California, so I'm up in the hills and I have all these trees now, and I noticed hummingbirds around. I was like, oh my gosh, this is my chance to get into hand feeding the hummingbirds. So that just started, I started doing that right before, like I say, about a week or two before we had to, shelter in place and stay at home indoors. So it was definitely a great hobby to get into because I got addicted to it. And then when we finally had to permanently stay indoors, I was like, why don't I try photographing one of these hummingbirds. And so this was the image that I took very in the beginning. And to me, I think it was a lucky shot because I was just amazed that I even took this. And so I'll go into detail as far as the details of how I shot it, as far as settings, but this is kind of the image that kind of sparked this whole birding journey for me. All right, so I'm going to go quickly over to into the lens designations, because I know a lot of people, not with just our brands, but other brands, when you look at the lenses, if you're new to, purchasing lenses, it's can be overwhelming when you look at the, all those letters on the lens, right? So it can be a little confusing, like what do they all mean? But quickly, our lenses, all of them will have DI, DI2, or DI3. So DI on our lenses stands for, that's optimized for full frame cameras. And DI2 is optimized for not short frame, crop sensor or APS-C cameras. And DI3 are for mirrorless. Because later, when we go through, when you see the images that I've taken, on the bottom right of the slides will be the lens I use. So that will help you to learn about lenses and which ones I use to shoot the image. So I'm going to go over quickly lenses that I used in this presentation. The 18-400, it is one of my favorite lenses, although I'm typically not an all-in-one zoom user, but when this one came out, I was just amazed about how, the range, first of all, and also learning that, it has a telemacro as well. So it's kind of your ultimate all-in-one travel lens. So I tried that out. The 35-150, I know the range may not seem, great to do birding, but like I said, I'm shooting from my balcony and the tree that I have right next to my balcony is really close. So I took some shots with that. The 70-210, I basically use this I tried it out with one of our teleconverters, a 1.4. And the reason for that is because I was shooting mainly with the 150-600, which is an absolute favorite for shooting birds. But sometimes it was getting quite heavy. And like I said, I haven't furnished my balcony. I don't have any comfy chairs or anything. I'm like sitting, either standing or sitting on this little step stool. So the 150-600 got quite heavy at times. And so I switched it out and tried out the 70-210 with the teleconverter combo. Another great alternative to the 150-600 is the 100-400, lighter alternative, and it's great as well. And then of course, the 150-600 is the ultimate birding lens. Most of our customers that shoot birds, they always opt for this one. All right, so some equipment to consider. I just went over the telephoto lenses, but like I said, if your setup or your background is you're closer, you have lenses that you can work with, that works as well. Maybe you might think about getting a teleconverter instead. Then I talk about bird feeders. After all the research and figuring out what birds are native in my area, and then figuring out the appropriate bird to attract, the appropriate feeder to attract them. A tripod or monopod. I try to set up a tripod because, like I said, sometimes the lens got a little heavy, but I'm never been much of a tripod user. So I kind of scratched that and I just did everything handheld. So yeah, but monopod, I know if you're familiar, we have a Tamron image master actually, David Akubian, and he does talk about in his talks how he uses a Surrey monopod. So that might be an option for you. And then teleconverter as well, I try that out. And a comfy chair. Like I said, I don't have anything on my balcony yet. And everything I've done is just standing or sitting or standing on my step stool. Okay, so here's a quick setup, look at my setup. So how you see me now, where I'm sitting, talking to you, is I'm sitting that's my desk. And so, I switched my work from home area to face the balcony just because, one, to get this natural light for these webinars. And then also, after discovering all this bird activity, I figured it'd just be easier if I could just see them as I'm working. And if, I see them flying, I can go out there or, take a quick shot from here or, hop outside to take a quick shot. So if you see me, darting my eyes, is because I'm looking at all my feeders and sometimes birds come. And so, yeah, so usually I'll have if you see on the bottom left there, a 150-600, usually on my D500. Oh yeah, so for reference, I am shooting with Nikon's, a Nikon D500, Nikon D750, and I do have a Sony a7 III, but I don't believe I've shot any birds with that yet. Maybe a couple, I'm not sure, I can't remember. So yes, I usually have it on right there next to me. It's right next to my leg right now, actually. And so that way, like I said, if I see birds coming and going, I can just quickly either take a shot from here through the glass door sometimes if I don't have my screen doors open like I do in the picture here. Usually now I will have them fully open. That's a great thing about the LA weather. We don't have that many bugs here, so we can have it open. And that way, if I do see, hummingbirds or birds at the feeder, I can just quickly get out there and not spook them by opening the door. So that helps a lot. So the tree that you see ahead there, actually, I'll go into that in a minute. This is the tripod setup that I did try next to my desk. But like I said, it didn't work out for me. Like I said, I'm more of a just a grab and go shooter. And another thing, that tripod is ancient, so it's really heavy, and I just scrapped that idea. So I'm working with what I have, and I haven't gotten a new tripod yet, so I'm just shooting handheld everything. Okay, so I'm going to go into different types of feeders. These are kind of the main ones that you'll hear about or see, read about if you're looking to get a new feeder, or if you already have one. So one of the most popular ones is called a hopper feeder, or typically they could call it like a house. It looks like a house sort of. And then you have your tube feeders, your suet feeders, a platform or tray. Sometimes they're like, can be just a flat open tray sometimes. And then a thistle or a sock feeder. And I decided, after research of figuring out what birds are in my area, I went with a finch feeder, more specifically a thistle or Niger seed feeder. And because a little premeditation, I knew like the hopper feeders, since they look like a house, or the platform feeders, they kind of just, if the birds were to come, they would just kind of sit towards the house or something to face the house, right? So I kind of thought about visually how I wanted the birds to look. So I went with this mesh tube feeder, specifically for Niger seeds. And this is the type of seed this feeder's for. And the reason I went with this type of seeds is because it's smaller, and mainly it's for like the finches, the house finches, and the goldfinches or lesser goldfinches. And since I have like bigger birds in my area, like ravens, like lots of ravens and squirrels, I didn't want to attract the bigger birds and the squirrels. So after much research, I read that this type of seed should not be, should deter the squirrels. Well, they'll be curious for sure. So they'll still be curious about it, and they'll sniff around, but it did work. They didn't really care for the seed. I guess it's either because it's too small, or they didn't want to go through the trouble of going through that feeder. I don't know, but they haven't, they were curious at first, but now they leave it alone. So yeah, so I put my feeder up, filled it with seeds, and for days I did not get any bites, not any birds landing on it. And I was just like, oh my gosh, I spent all this time researching, and this feeder had so many reviews online, and no birds came yet. Even my Hummingbird that comes every day, he thought it was a brand new feeder for him, but no. So finally I got my first bird landing on it, and I was just so ecstatic. I was like, oh my gosh, finally. So this is, after much research, I found out this is a lesser goldfinch. And so I kept shooting, and another bird came, and I was just like, oh my gosh, I thought it was going to scare it away, because being used to my hummingbirds, they're territorial, and they kind of chase other birds away. So I thought that's what this was happening, but I found out that they're not. So they're actually feeding each other. And after further research and reading up on them, I figure out that they kind of have like a mating ritual. So it's either a mating ritual, or it could be parents feeding their young ones. And so this is a picture example of why I chose this type of feeder. Since it's a mesh tube feeder, the birds can cling to it in any type of position. So I was thinking ahead visually that, I wanted the birds to kind of have their options, or for me to have options to shoot them in interesting positions. So like such as this, where the bird is kind of, arch its back, bending its back out. And sometimes the birds will cling upside down. So I felt like this type of feeder for me, I knew that I could get different options of images, rather than if I were to go with a platform or a hopper feeder, that most of the time they'll probably just be facing the house or the feeder, and there's nothing else they can do. So that's why I went with this type of feeder. I put this in because I know in past talks, some people ask, what do I do with the bird droppings or the wasted seeds? And to be honest, I haven't had any issues really. And I looked really close, and after reading more, the seeds aren't being wasted. So what you see there on the ground, they're actually the husk that's being discarded after the birds feed. And so they split it open and they just discard the husk. So that's what it is. So it's not actually the seeds being wasted. As far as the bird droppings, I know in the previous talk, a lady asked me, what do I do? Since I'm in an apartment building, I am on the top floor, and she's the same. She was the same. She was wondering, you know, worried about the neighbors below, if the seeds fall down or any of the bird droppings. I haven't had that issue. And I actually, my stand for the bird feeder is actually inside the balcony. It's not hanging over on the rails. So I haven't had that issue, and except for, you know, the mess that it makes. And it's an easy sweep up. So I haven't had any problems with that. So now we're gonna take a closer look actually at the tree. So where I'm sitting, and so the tree you see diagonally in the upper right, that's actually what I use. So the funny story with this tree is that when I first moved into this place, the tree was actually full and lush, like really big. And actually the branches kind of went into my balcony too. And then I was, you know, when we were traveling every weekend, I went on a work trip. I came back and I went on my balcony, and I was just like, I noticed something different. And I was like, what's going on? And then I was like, oh my gosh, they chopped down my tree. And I remember I was so disappointed. But then to my surprise, it had started attracting so many birds. And I guess because of all the exposed branches, they were just natural perches for them. So, which, you know, like I started attracting all types of birds, like they just kept landing, even like exposed branches within the tree, and fledglings, you just, you know, perching on them. I was just like, wow, I had no idea I had all these birds. But again, you know, we used to travel like every week. And since being home, I started noticing all this. And so, yes, so that would be an idea for you if you are trying to create like a little bird studio in your backyard, is to somehow, if you don't have trees with these, you know, pre-cut branches or anything, then you could maybe find like, you know, branches if you have I don't know, in the woods or something, or buy some, you know, make some branches and, you know, put them up. So that would be an idea, because they're attracted to it. Okay, so the image that sparked it all, this was taken with the 15600. And like I said, I started out with the hummingbirds before I discovered all these other birds. And this was shot at, I used shutter priority, and because I knew that in my mind I was thinking I probably had to shoot at a high speed. So I definitely had it on continuous high on my D750. And I was really close because I had my step stool let me see. Let me go to the next slide. Hold on. Oh, let me go over this real quick, and then I'll talk about how I set up the other shot. So here are some quick hummingbird tips. The color red, if you're not familiar, hummingbirds are attracted to bright colors, reds, especially reds, yellows, oranges, pinks and purples, but they do love red. That's why you'll see like a lot of feeders. The hummingbird feeders are of the color red. If not, like mine is actually copper with red flower ports, and my hand feeder is actually red with yellow flower ports. And so that if you're looking to, you know, track them, definitely anything with red. Sometimes even if I plan to go out there and hand feed the hummingbirds myself, I'll wear red myself. So perch with them. What I mean by that is kind of, even with the other birds, to be in their habitat. Like if they're used to seeing you outside, like, you know, I'm always out on my balcony sitting there. Some of them are kind of used to me now, so they don't really get scared easily. So that's what I mean by perch with them. Be patient, really patient. This has been, oh gosh, I think since we had to stay indoors a lot, it definitely has been time consuming, which is great because I've gotten addicted to it. Sometimes I'll be sitting out there forever, or just sitting here at my desk and always watching on alert and making sure I'm not missing anything. So it takes a lot of patience, but it helps to, if we're stuck indoors, it's been helping to get have the time pass by. Know your bird. Originally, this was meant for only the hummingbirds. But like I said, I started out with hummingbirds, but I found out that there are different types of hummingbirds. So there's big ones and there's really teeny tiny ones. And the different wing flap rates, depending on what, how big the bird is, even with other birds now, it kind of helps to determine your shutter speed too. And shoot fast and continuous. Like I said, I have mine on shutter priority, auto ISO, and on continuous high on both cameras. So this was the setup on the first photo of the hummingbird in the midair. So I know, looking at the 150-600 is such a big lens, and normally you would think that, why am I using it on a balcony? Because usually you use that lens out in the field, in the landscapes or shooting wildlife or on a safari, right? But if you didn't know, the minimum focal distance on the 150-600 when zoomed all the way out is a little over 7 feet, 86.6 inches to be exact. So knowing that, I set my step stool and to be as close as possible to my hummingbird feeder. You probably can't see it, but in the top right corner is actually where my hummingbird feeder is hanging from the top there. And so I just, perched on that little step stool forever, waiting for it to come. This was, like I said, this was in the beginning when I didn't know anything about the hummingbirds. I would be out there waiting forever and just trying to get my shot. So that's how I took that first shot, actually. And I had it at 640th of a second. And I think I had it there because I took this shot first, actually. So this hummingbird was sitting and I was practicing at first. So I had it on 640 since I knew if I'm just going to capture it sitting and if it's possibly going to hover in midair, then, 640th should be okay. I know a lot of people have commented before saying why didn't shoot higher or why didn't use a flash. I tried using a flash to shoot at a higher, frame rate, or shutter speed, but I only have one. And for me to set it up where my feeder is, it just wasn't easy, I guess you could say. And it just didn't work for me. So everything is natural lighting, no external lighting, handheld. And another thing to point out, so if you're new to the hummingbirds, I purposely bought this feeder because it had like those branch-like perches. So that way I can practice shooting them on the perch. So then I started shooting more of the hummingbirds. It is actually just one same hummingbird that comes visits every day. He's pretty territorial. He chases the others away. So this one was actually shot through this sliding glass door from my desk, where I had my desk actually on the other side. And I don't know, it was like one of those few rare rainy days here in LA. And I noticed the hummingbird in the tree from way inside. I noticed it, and then I grabbed my camera with the 150-600 and took a shot through the sliding glass door. So then I just kept taking more pictures and learning more about them. And here's a quick info about, the wing flaps wing flap rate that I mentioned earlier. They can flap anywhere from 12 to 200 per second. And again, that can help you determine whether you need a faster or slower shutter speed. And so back to this one, like I said, it wasn't that high of a shutter speed, or fast of a shutter speed. It was at 640th of a second. And auto ISO, like I said, I had it at that frame rate just because, or shutter speed, because I was shooting it sitting at first, and then I just happened to catch it when it was in midair. So after all this, after all the observations and studying their habits, I've learned that a good tip is, like, if you observe them, their feeding habits, you'll know that they'll hover midair sometimes, like after they feed, and then they'll take a break. Either they'll sit or they'll hover in midair for a few seconds. So now I know that's like my chance to catch them in midair. Oh, this is another thing. This helped me a lot in the beginning. And this is the first time I ever tried the focus limiter on the 150-600. So with the 15600, it is really a big range, and it has this focus limiter. And what that does is, since I knew I was setting myself up at the closest range at the minimum focal distance, I set it at the close range to focus at. So that way it won't have to focus way beyond if I, got off center or off my subject. So like if you can see right here, there's 3 settings, the full length of it, so meaning if you're focusing, it'll use the whole entire range of the lens. And then you have the closest distance to the subject, and then from the mid to the furthest. So I set mine to the closest, and I definitely noticed that it cut down on my focus time. The amount of time, it helped a lot. I definitely noticed a change in that. So that's something to try if you have that lens. All right, so this is the next image that sparked this whole birding photography journey. So this was the, I would say, the first bird image that I took outside of the hummingbird. So this was the first image I took. And again, I felt like it was a lucky shot. This was when I had my desk on the other side again, and I saw this bird landing on the tree, and I grabbed my camera off the floor and took it from straight through the sliding glass door again. So I feel like both of my shots that I took in the beginning were lucky shots. I believe this was shot at, let me see if I have the notes here. I think it was at, it might have been the same at maybe 640 per second. I don't, but I can look it up afterwards if anybody wants to know that. Again, most likely shutter priority. I think I shot shutter priority always, auto ISO always, and I think I know I switched up my metering mode, because in the beginning I shot mainly matrix metering, but then after I was talking to our consulting with our Tamron image master, David Akubian, who is like our birder extraordinaire, he shoots in spot metering. So if you'll see, I'll try to point it out later, like the second half of my photos, I feel like once I switched over, my exposure was more consistent, and when I was shooting, it was more efficient because I knew how the images were going to turn out. So I'll try to point that out at some point. Okay, so I'm going to give you the shortcut to everything, to finding out the birds in your area, because I did it a long way where I Googled every bird and everything to figure out where they were, when I didn't know there was an app for it. So if you didn't know, there is an app for birds, and it's a great app. This is the website, actually, the Cornell Lab of Ornithology. The URL is on the bottom right there. But if you were to download it on your phone, it's called the Mercer Bird ID app, I believe, Mercer Bird ID. Yes, and I wish I knew about this because it would have cut down all the time. I had to Google every bird. This, you can just look it up, even if it will pinpoint your area, put in your location, and it will tell you to this day, what types of birds. It'll give you a list of what types of birds you'll most likely see. Or if you see a bird, you can take a picture and look it up. You can do that. Or if you want to, you hear certain sounds, you can listen to sound calls in the app, so that way you know what types of birds are in your area. I wish I knew all this ahead of time. It would have saved a lot of time for me, but here I am to tell you about it. So it is called the Mercer Bird ID app, and it is available for Apple and Android. So here is my journey of Googling every bird in my area. This is when I was just taking random shots of birds so that I can look them up. I found out now, it's a raven. I was debating between it was a crow or a raven, but then it dawned on me one day, I was like, my street is called Raven Spur, so it has to be ravens. They're really hard to photograph. They're so dark. It is not like, an awesome picture or anything, but like I said, I was going through just taking random shots of birds to try to figure out what's around here. So there's a raven, and I mean, I'm quite impressed because this shot was way up in the tree, like really far, and I shot it with the 15600. I think by now I switched it over to shooting it with the D500 just to give me that little bit of extra reach. And this is the best I could do with the ravens. And actually, I kind of like it because it reminds me of the Birds movie, if you're familiar with that. It's one of my favorite movies. And I figured, you know what, I'll just shoot the silhouettes with the ravens because since they're so dark already. And I saw them, gosh, they fly and they dive around here a lot. So this is what they do. And I was shooting them, and it was another rare gray day here in LA. It was actually darker. So what I did is I brought this into Lightroom and I bumped up the whites a little bit just to, give it a little more contrast. And I didn't want to go too white just because I wanted to give it more that dreary, eerie look, to give that look of the Birds movie. So that's the best I can do with the ravens. So I continue on shooting just random birds in the area to figure out what they were. Like I said, I would shoot a bird, and so I have it for reference, and I would Google, literally I would Google gray bird with patches of red in Los Angeles. And I found out it's a house finch. So, I kept doing that with other birds. This is the same, house finches, feeding its juvenile. And then I saw this bird and I was like, oh my gosh, I'm getting more colorful birds now. So I took this, again, did the same thing. I Googled yellow bird with patches of black and found out it's either a goldfinch or a lesser goldfinch. And then, so more pictures for reference to Google, bird with a black head. I thought was so cool. Then I found out, after Googling it, it's a dark-eyed junco, which is really cool. So yeah, that was my process of figuring out what birds were in the area. So I went through all this to finally figure out which bird feeder and stuff I went with. And then I started noticing fledglings like perching on the trees, and I was just like so excited because I'm like, oh my gosh, I think, when you see birds and you shoot them, but it's always something about the babies and the young ones that are always cute. So I started noticing them, and I kept shooting, and I noticed this was about, I think, either late April or May. So I think there was the time of like mating and breeding, and all these fledglings and juveniles were popping up everywhere, like this one. And I was just so happy. Like it landed on the tree. I kept shooting, and I was pretty close to it too, and clicking away, and I didn't mind at all. I mean, to a point where I felt like it just, it was like, are you done yet? And but so to talk about the exposure settings on this, I know there's some hot spots on it. Like I said, those are in the beginning of my images, and after learning more of the metering, I switched over later to center weighted metering, even though I know when I consulted with our bird extraordinaire, David Akubian, he shoots in spot metering, but I think because he has a really big yard and backyard for his studio, and since I'm shooting really close where my tree is, and the center weighted worked for me later on. So continue on just shooting, everything I could find. So this was a really busy time, like from April to May. A lot of these finches were around, and they're growing, and they're feeding off the feeder like constantly, and they're very active. The times of day I notice they're active is bright early, like the break of dawn, which I'm not an early riser, but I do hear them, doing their song chorus at that time, like 5:30 in the morning. But now I feel like they've moved on, or maybe they migrated somewhere. I'm not sure because I don't see them as much. Maybe there's a couple that still come. The hummingbirds are still active. They're still here year round. And yeah, I kind of miss the finches, but they're all here. And these are all the times that these two were my favorite couple. I call them a couple. I named them Romeo and Juliet just because they're in the tree at the same time. And now that I learned about their calls, so this one was making like kind of a dominant call, like he was on the top of the tree. Then after I hear the dominant call, I would hear like these tiny little chirps right after it, which was coming from her. So I was looking inside the tree to find her, and it was really hard because, like, as you can see, she kind of blends in with the leaves there. And I finally found her, and then I was shooting, and just kept shooting. And so I guess my point on this is like, a lot of the shots I was able to get is because I think it was just hours and hours of observing their habits, and I'm learning about their calls. So now, like when I hear the same types of calls, where it's a dominant call followed by those slight chirps, I know there's gonna be two birds in the tree. And now I even know the different calls of when they're gonna come to the feeder. Like there's a certain call they do, and now I just repetitive like, hearing it over and over, I know when they're gonna come to eat. So that helps with anticipating your shots. It's kind of like I used to shoot salsa competitions, and I dance salsa, and it's all about anticipating the next move or stuff like that. So it's the same with, I find like the process of learning how to shoot these birds is just learning their habits, how they feed, and what they do after they feed, and then I anticipate my shot better. So this is my little hummingbird guy again. This is one of the few times I was able to capture him away from the feeder. So I started to get bored of shooting the birds at the feeder. So I'm trying to like figure out where they go after they feed. And again, so another thing after observing all this time is that the birds, the hummingbirds, I noticed this with the hummingbirds first, is that after they feed, they will fly to their favorite perch spot and they'll clean off their beaks. So what I literally have sat and watched them. They'll feed and they will fly to their nearest favorite spot to perch, and they dip their beaks onto either the branches or the leaves and clean it off. So it's really cute. So this is one of the times I caught him actually scratching himself, which is really cool. I thought it was really cute. And I was like, oh, all these trees have all these branches and twigs in the way. So I finally was able to catch him out in the open, unobstructed with the little branches. So this was another time I caught him. I followed him after he fed and went to inside the tree. So that's what I've been doing lately, is to try to get away from shooting at the feeder. Because I know that they're gonna fly into the tree, I'll follow them, and if I can see where they are, I'll take a shot. So that's usually another good way to anticipate a shot is, after they're eating at your feeder, they'll usually fly to their favorite spot. So that's a good, way to keep an eye and follow them. Even with the finches, they'll do the same thing. Like, I think there's a shot later, I'll bring it up, but so here, I'm trying to think where, I think by now, I think I'm getting to like the second half of the images. So I've switched over to center weighted metering, and I've stayed on that throughout the rest of the images, because I noticed that it just totally helped with the overall exposure of the image and to my liking. And for me to shoot, it was more efficient, because I knew, kind of visualize like it's gonna come out the way I wanted to. So by now, like I said, everything's still the same: shutter priority, auto ISO, auto white balance, and center weighted metering. So this was another attempt at the hummingbird in midair, compared to the very first one. So this was shot when, like I said, when he was hovering midair after feeding. So it's really kind of hard to really try to get them in midair because they're so fast and they're darting around. But like I said, if you know their habits, after they feed, they'll hover midair for a few seconds, and I know that's my chance to catch them. And actually, this was just shot a few days ago. Actually, I set up so this is my handheld feeder. So if the handheld feeder came with this little gadget, I guess with a suction cup that you can put it on the window when you're not using it, so that the hummingbird can still find it when you're not out there. So I have it on my sliding door. Actually, is right in front of me, because that way, as I'm working here, sitting at the desk, I can have some entertainment when they come and visit. So I decided to, why not try and shoot them remotely while they're feeding right there. So I set up my camera there's a one time I used my tripod. So I set up on the tripod, and I wanted to shoot from my desk as I'm working, or I didn't want to be out there. I didn't want to sit out there as I have been. And I decided to use the Nikon. If you're familiar, Nikon has a an app where you can shoot wirelessly through the Nikon app. And so I did that because even if you were to try and use the remote shutter, the little infrared one, you couldn't, because you have to like be in direct line of the line sight, and it didn't work for me. So I was like, wait a minute, I know they have the wireless app. So that's what I did. I was like, I'm seeing if it works, and I set it up, set it to use with the Nikon app, and yeah, I was able to shoot that, and actually use the 90 macro on this one just because I wanted to get up close as possible. And I don't know if you can notice, but you can even see its tongue in the nectar there. So yeah, Ben, I just took that one just a few days ago for you. Okay, so this was this was just like a couple weeks too ago. This was a new shot where I learned that the finches have kind of like this great social etiquette. They'll wait in line to feed at the feeder. So if the feeder is busy with like, I think at this time there was like, I think already 2 birds on it. So she was just waiting. And this is the first time I had a finch just clinging onto the side of my balcony right there on the wood. So I took a shot of it. So this also gave me an idea to later on, maybe I might get like another little branch to clamp onto the railing or something, try to create like another different perch area as they're waiting to feed. So that way, as they're waiting, they're perched on there, that you can capture images on there while they're waiting. So yeah, that gave me an idea of, when she was waiting in line here. And then, yeah, so this is who she was waiting for. He was eating at the feeder. And another rare drizzly day here in LA. And also another rare time when I've never seen the finches, wait on the railing before. They usually just fly off after they feed. But I think since it was drizzling, he was just waiting for his chance to, fly to his favorite perch spot to clean off his beak. Because as you can see, he just finished eating. His beak is a little messy right there. So, and then finally, I was able to shoot. Oh gosh, I was just like so happy to see a baby fledgling. I heard these, like I said, I heard these little chirps, these constant chirps in the tree. And I was like looking deep up and down the tree. I couldn't find it for the longest time. I finally did. And the reason because it was hugging the tree like so close. That's why I couldn't spot it. And I kept shooting and shooting because like, oh my gosh, this is my only time to shoot a fledgling, right? And I ran inside to take a look, and I opened the camera, and there was like no memory card. I was like, oh my gosh, I was so devastated. But then I calmed down, and I actually switched out lenses because I didn't have the original lens I want on there. And I switched over to the 72-10 with a teleconverter because since I knew the fledgling was like really deep inside, and I had to angle myself over the railing, the 15600 would be just too heavy to lean over. And so finally I got this image, this great image. It was a really bright day. And it finally tilted its head where its eye caught the, a little bit of that sunlight. So it was perfect. And then later in the evening, it finally moved up to the top of the tree, and I felt like it was just fluffing itself. And sorry, I have like a hummingbird right in front of me right now. So it finally fluffed itself and got into position, and I got this image. And so yeah, that kind of made my day. I got my young finch pictures, and that totally did it for me. So I believe that's the end of my images so far. Every week I'm taking new images, and I've learned so much, and I hope, I've helped you in your new journey to shooting birds.